It is an honor to welcome everyone who joined us today in High Ability Day. We've organized this session to bring the voice of first line researchers to our alumni. They are very well known in the research and care for gifted children within and without the school. We want to give you an international overview about the educational offer given to bright and gifted kids. And it is an honor to have Mr. Renzulli, Mr. Pfizer, and Mr. Turon in this meeting. We could speak at length about their contributions to the field and their bios. I wouldn't have enough time. Between the three of them, they bring to the table more than 100 years of research on high ability studies. Before I introduce our first guest, I would like to remind you that there is simultaneous interpretation provided, and you just need to go to the globe at the bottom and choose the language you would like to listen to this in. And without further ado, we're going to start with this event. We are going to have a foremost lecturer, keynote speaker, Mr. Renzulli, who I know personally, and he's been named one of the 25 most important psychologists in the world. His contribution to the field is enormous, with the three rings of high ability, the triad enrichment model, the how to compact and differentiate curriculum, which he pioneered and then has been developed later on as the SEM model, the school enrichment model, which is highly researched and applied around the world. He is going to talk about this today. Thank you very much for joining us today, Joe.
Thank you very much, and greetings to everyone. I am extremely honored to be here and would like to thank my dear friend Javier for all that he has done to help share our information about the school-wide enrichment model to the Spanish-speaking world. There is lots of information about this model in Spanish that you can get by contacting Javier. I'd like to present a very brief overview of this model. Again, there are many articles and books on it that are available, but this brief overview is an orientation. The theme of our model is that schools should be places for talent development. Yes, children need to learn the basic curriculum. That's always important. But I also believe that the future leaders in all areas of human activity, from business to policymakers, every other area is going to be based on the creative productivity of the talents that we develop in young people. My second theme is that what I call a rising tide lifts all ships. I have consistently argued that we should be providing various types of enrichment for all students and determine if the opportunities that we provide them lead to more follow-up activity on their part. So that's a little bit about our work, and there's more than 40 years of research in an article that Javier will be sharing with you. The model is based on two theories that you see at the bottom of the screen: the three-ring conception of giftedness and the enrichment triad model. And these things have led to the development of the school-wide enrichment model, which I will be describing in some detail as we move through these slides. The people often ask me what are the goals of the three-ring of the school-wide enrichment model, And I always say that they are enjoyment, which leads to engagement, which leads to enthusiasm for learning. And the one that's the most important to me is the first one, enjoyment. Anytime children enjoy what they're learning, they become much more engaged in it and much more active in the learning process. And so I believe a major goal should always try to infuse into whatever we do with young people that promotes more enjoyment in learning. Um, the enjoyment leads to all of the kinds of other things that you see on the right hand side of the screen: excitement, energy, experience, effort, emotion, and encouragement. Um, this is a very brief overview of what I call a continuum of learning theories. All learning exists on a continuum which ranges from the deductive, didactic, and prescriptive on the right to the inductive, investigative, and inquiry oriented. I'm sorry, the first one's on the left, not the right. Um, on the right, we have inductive, investigative, and inquiry oriented. I am not opposed to the basic curriculum. Children need to learn their lessons, but I also believe that the outcomes of enrichment should be invention, creative, productive, investigative activities in arts, technology, and other areas in which young people produce various different kinds of products. Product development is really the outcome of a model that focuses on this brand of learning. Um, these are the two basic theories. I will not elaborate on them at this time. A great deal of our written work will explain each of the components of these two basic underlying theories. Um, the three ring conception of giftedness is the most widely cited article in the field. It says that we must look at creativity and task commitment in addition to, not in place of, but in addition to above average ability in a particular area. And when these three things are working together, we produce what we call gifted behaviors. My preference is always to use the word giftedness as an adjective. Now, this is the three ring conception of giftedness. I'm sorry, the school wide enrichment model. And we see that it is broken down into three service delivery components: comprehensive strength assessment. And by that, I mean that we must look at more than just IQ or achievement scores. We need to look at things like interests, like preferred ways in which young people like to learn, preferred ways in which they like to express themselves. And as you will see shortly, we've developed many instruments to gather information on these different kinds of strengths. The second thing is a process that we've developed called curriculum compacting that allows our highest achieving students to move through the regular curriculum at a faster rate or pace than children not so high in achievement. And this basically prevents boredom on the parts of high achieving young people. The third part, again, is the triad model, three types of enrichment that we provide for children. I'll be elaborating on that in a minute. On the right hand side, we see a series of resources and services that my colleagues and I have developed over the years to make implementation easier. Our most recent one is a technology based program that I'll be mentioning very shortly. Um, the other thing that is very important for everybody dealing with talent development is to understand that there are differences between high achieving giftedness, again, which is very important, but also what I consider to be creative, productive giftedness. And this requires, again, that we look at interests. Interests always lead the list for me of things that we should find out about children. Then their learning styles, their expression styles, their enjoyment of learning, their engagement, and their executive function skills. And again, you'll see some instruments on that as we move along. Here we see a list of the various instruments that we've developed over the years. And these can all be translated into any language, into Spanish, of course, in this case. And you need not, there's no fee for this. You need not ask permission for it. I believe that if information is going to help us make schools better places for young people, we must not charge money for it, but rather make it available at no cost. And so if you go to our website or contact Javier, you can find access to many of these instruments. Here's just an example of one of the instruments that we've developed to look at imagination, creativity, and innovation. We ask young people a series of questions. My teachers ask me to look at things in different ways, and then we rate them from never to almost always. And by finding out about this information, we can personalize the curriculum for young people. Now, the what of our model is based on the enrichment triad model, three different types of enrichment. And it is very important for me to emphasize that two of these general types of enrichment are provided for all students, along with a process that we've developed called enrichment clusters that are interest based groups for all students. And when students get very interested and excited about something from one of these types of general enrichment, then these arrows point out that they can then go and do more advanced work in what we call creative, productive student outcomes, producing some kind of product, a written product, a presented product, a dramatic product, a constructed product, a community action product. And this is really the highest level of payoff. And it's really based on the modus operandi of creative, productive adults. Creative, productive adults that have done many things to make the world a better place have always produced some kind of product of the types that I've just mentioned. They've made a movie like Steven Spielberg, or they've done some scientific work like Albert Einstein, or they've developed an important company or business through various famous entrepreneurs. And so this is really the essence of the theory that underlies our talent development work. Um, I'd like to give you just one example of what I mean by creative productive giftedness. This is a young girl named Kylie who became interested in ladybugs as a result of a unit she was studying with her teacher on insects. She decided to develop a board game. Here you see a picture of her, and that board game, called the Ladybug Game, was eventually produced by a commercial company, and it is now available in all stores and catalogs that provide learning games for children. So here's a picture of some of the what we call how-to books that we made available to Kylie to develop this game. And one of the things I believe is that if we want to give young people the creative and investigative skills of adults, we should make available to them these kinds of what we call how to books. As a matter of fact, I recommend that all librarians set up a separate shelf in their library that makes use of how to books. Everybody listening to us today has used how to books. They don't know it, but they have used them. If there's a cookbook in any place in your home, you have used how-to books. And so these are the perfect example of teaching a person how to create something, produce something. I happen to be a bread maker, and I have a shelf with at least 10 how-to books on baking bread. Um, the final slide here is just a picture of the box that Kylie's ladybug game comes in. And so understanding the difference between lesson learning giftedness, which I do not argue against, and creative productive giftedness is one of the most important things that you should have if you are trying to produce the type of enrichment that we produce in the school-wide enrichment model. So here's just a picture of Kylie's game. And I believe that that's my, no, I have one more slide here. I call it the concept of ore. You know, that gold that is found in the soil out in the mountains of Spain. Opportunities, resources, and encouragement. The role of the teacher should always be to provide opportunities, resources, and encouragement for young people. Um, One of the things that we've done to make this easier is to develop an online program. Forgive the title, the University of Connecticut paid for its development and named it. It's called Renzulli Learning. And this program can be translated and already is translated into Spanish. And what happens in this program is that the student sits down at her or his computer and they answer a series of questions from the instruments that I showed you. A very creative database then searches through thousands of resources and based on that child's profile, picks resources just for that child. So, this is the way we use technology to differentiate and personalize information. If you're interested in that program, just go to renzullilearning.com and you will find information also about how you can get a Spanish language copy. And here again is just a picture of what the program looks like, the individual strength assessment, all the areas that students are asked questions about. And then this is the categories of the databases that contain the 5,000 resources that we use in Renzulli Learning. So here is an example of a profile. This is a young girl named Valerie, and her profile is printed out. And in this one, I've circled her three top areas of interest, the three ways that she likes to learn best, her learning styles, and the three ways that she would like to express herself. And I believe that this use of technology will allow all teachers from all over the world to be able to do much more in personalizing learning and putting more focus on creative, productive giftedness rather than just on lesson learning giftedness. And I believe that that's my last slide. And Javier, I would be happy to answer any questions or whatever you would like to do next in the program.
Thank you, Joe. Muchas gracias por tu magnífica
Thank you, Joe.
presentación.
That was a great presentation. Let
Continuamos
me
con
continue now
Steven
with
Pfeiffer.
Mr. Pfeiffer,
Pfeiffer es
our
nuestro
next
siguiente ponente
speaker. And
y
I'm
me hace mucha
very
ilusión
excited to
presentarle, ya
present
que no
him.
solo tengo
I'm
la suerte de
fortunate
conocerlo
enough
también,
to
sino que
have
codirige
met
mi
him
investigación
personally, and he's
predoctoral
co-directing
sobre las
my
escalas de
research
detección
on
Gift and Rating Scales
detection
de las que
scales
estamos
for which we're
haciendo
doing the validation in Spain.
la
That's my
validación en
pre-doctoral
España.
thesis. He's
Pfeiffer es
a
profesor
professor of
emérito de la
State University
Universidad Estatal de
in
Florida
Florida,
y
and
es
he's known
considerado
as one
uno de
of the
los
best
mejores
researchers in
investigadores
talent
en el campo del
development.
desarrollo del
He's made
talento, con
very
destacadas
good
aportaciones
contributions, for example,
como su
on high
conceptualización de las altas
ability
capacidades con su
and
modelo
the
tripartito,
triad
que
model, which
reconcilia
brings
algunos
together different
enfoques
focus
y
and
nace
is
de su
the
experiencia
outcome
dando
of
una
his own
respuesta práctica
experience
a esta realidad.
in the field.
Sus
His main
principales
research
trabajos e
has
investigaciones se
focused
han
on
centrado en las
social and
necesidades
emotional
sociales y
needs
emocionales de
of
los niños
high
y adolescentes de alta
ability
capacidad,
children
que es de
and
lo que nos
youngsters,
viene a
which is
hablar
his
hoy.
subject today. Thank you
Gracias
very
por
much for
estar con
being here
nosotros.
and
Bienvenido.
welcome.
Hello. My name is Stephen Pfeiffer, and I am a professor at Florida State University and delighted to have been included in the invitation for this very exciting roundtable conversation about high ability students and the gifted and talented. Just thrilled to be here to share with you my most recent thinking and research and writing on a model that I call strengths of the heart. I only wish that I was presenting live in Spain and not speaking to you through a computer screen thousands of miles away. But we'll try to make this a brief but lively conversation. What I'll be talking with you today about is how I became interested in positive psychology, social emotional learning, which led me about 25 years ago to develop this model called Strengths of the Heart. I'll talk briefly about a very important breakthrough in the mental health field called the dual factor model, and then spend a little more time talking about my Strengths of the Heart model. Those of you not familiar with my model, let me point out a key component is that we've found what we call 3 super traits. These super traits make a real difference in the mental health and success of high ability and gifted children. And the 3 super traits I'll be talking about are emotional intelligence, social skills, and finally, character strengths. All right. Early influences in my understanding of positive psychology and how focusing on the strengths or assets of bright and gifted kids made a world of difference in their lives came from my work as a clinical psychologist working in New Orleans, Louisiana at the Ochsner Medical Center under the supervision of a brilliant supervisor, Andy Burka. Picture of Andy Burka here shows that he was one of the first psychologists in the United States back in the 1980s to introduce this notion of positive psychology as a way of building resilience in kids. The second influence, going back to the 1980s, was the good fortune of my having an opportunity in the summer to work with Michael Rutter. Michael Rutter is a well-known child psychiatrist from London. Sir Michael Rutter really challenged me to think about, if you want to build on resilience in high ability and gifted kids, we really need to focus on their social emotional skills. So both Andy Burka and Sir Michael Rutter played an early part in my appreciation for looking at strengths of high ability youngsters. Second influence on my thinking on positive psychology and strengths of the heart came from my work as executive director of the Duke University gifted program known as Duke TIP. As executive director of the Duke program, I was really the headmaster of the summer academy, and each summer we'd have upwards of 2,000 highly gifted and talented children from really all over the United States and all over the globe coming to the campus of Duke. And I had the great opportunity to meet with many of them. And it introduced me to this notion that kids who were not fitting in well might not be necessarily twice exceptional. They might not necessarily have a serious psychological problem. Maybe what they're lacking are skills that led me to think about strengths of the heart. So the Duke TIP program really opened my eyes to understanding when things don't go quite well with high ability and gifted kids emotionally, how can we understand how to help them? Finally, I was invited at the time by the governor of Florida to serve as co-director of the Florida Governor's School for Science and Space Technology. And this furthered my appreciation for understanding the value of looking at the whole gifted child, not just their head strengths, but what I would call their heart strengths. Okay, I mentioned the dual factor model of mental health, hugely important construct in the mental health field. Now, I should say, I'm not an educator by training. I'm a clinical psychologist. I focus on the inner world of the gifted youngster. I've been focusing my career for the last 40 years on their social and emotional functioning. Since Freud, the mental health field really has emphasized a one-dimensional perspective on whether or not kids are doing okay. But about 20 years ago, a number of researchers introduced this notion of a dual factor model, that in addition to the dimension of whether kids are doing okay or not, we should focus on their subjective well-being. Let's look at how close they're moving towards optimal functioning. And this got me thinking about serving as director of the Duke TIP program and co-director of the Florida Governor's School for Science and Space Technology, that we should start looking at level of engagement, expression of positive emotions, meaning in life. These kids' concern for others and not just themselves. Looking at what we call subjective well-being in understanding the inner world of high ability and gifted youngsters. Okay. Back in 1998, when I was at Duke University as a professor there and executive director of the Duke TIP program, we initially focused exclusively on emotional intelligence as perhaps the answer to understanding why not all high ability and gifted kids did well psychologically. And we did a lot of research, my doctoral students and I, on emotional intelligence. And I'm going to be honest with you, we thought that emotional intelligence was going to be the silver bullet, the panacea that explained why some gifted kids grew up and developed to be well-adjusted, happy, engaged, excited about life, but others didn't. We thought emotional intelligence was the answer. We were wrong. We were wrong, however. It was a sobering experience, and I developed a lot of humility as an academic clinician in recognizing that we were right in part. Emotional intelligence is important in terms of important life outcomes for high ability kids, but it really isn't hugely important. We looked at how emotional intelligence, or researchers call it EI, relates to a kid's self-efficacy, their self-esteem, how engaged they are in their school, how the quality of their relationships with peers and friends. And what we found, and I'm only going to share a few bits of data here, just to give you a taste for all the research that was undertaken at first Duke University, and then subsequently I was recruited to Florida State University, where our research lab continued our work on EI, or emotional intelligence. And as you can see here, we had some significant correlations that EI, or emotional intelligence, did relate to important life outcomes of bright kids, but it didn't lead to hugely significant correlations. So EI is important, but it really wasn't as important as we thought or we had hypothesized. It wasn't the magic bullet that we hoped for in explaining why not all gifted kids grow up to be well-adjusted. As you can see here, the correlation's significant, but modest at best. And those of you familiar with a lot of my published research know that we conducted numerous studies trying to determine whether EI was the answer to the well-being of gifted youngsters. So we started expanding our search. We said, okay, emotional intelligence doesn't explain all of the variance in how well-adjusted gifted kids are today and tomorrow and in their adult lives. What else might account for their well-being? And this led to the beginning of the development of my model of strengths of the heart and the 3 super traits that I talked about earlier. All right. Really, in addition to our lab findings, we started interviewing hundreds of gifted adults. These were youngsters who attended the Duke University Gifted Program and grew up, and we followed them for 5, 10, 15 years, interviewed them to see whether they were successful in their jobs, whether they had close friends, whether they had intimate relationships, whether they were enjoying life, whether they were seeing meaning in what they were doing. We also interviewed their parents and teachers of hundreds upon hundreds of gifted youngsters to try to build a theory for what might explain the well-being of gifted youngsters beyond just emotional intelligence. Again, leading to the 3 super traits that make up my strengths of the heart model. Ultimately, the triple package of strengths that we came to understand really explain the well-being, the healthy adjustment of almost all adult gifted youngsters was emotional intelligence. That was one part, but second part, social skills, and the third part, character strengths and virtues. And I'll explain each of these briefly. Okay, in terms of emotional intelligence, it's clearly not the same as IQ. Anytime we think about cognition, we recognize that emotions play a key part. There are 4 key elements that most researchers and theoreticians consider when they think about emotional intelligence. It's whether a youngster recognizes or can read their own emotions, whether they know how they're feeling, their affect level, whether they can manage their emotions, what we call self-control. Third, whether they can recognize the emotions, the affect of others, other kids, peers, teachers, parents, adults. And finally, the 4th component of emotional intelligence is how well a youngster handles emotional relationships, what we call interpersonal decision-making. These are the 4 elements when we think about emotional intelligence. And the good news is there are really great measures that we can administer to young, high ability and gifted youngsters to see where they are in terms of emotional intelligence. The second component, the second super trait, in addition to emotional intelligence, are social skills. What we found through our observations, through our research, interviews with parents, interviews with teachers, following up our gifted kids over 20 years, that social skills also explained the success of gifted kids growing up. Social skills enable kids to communicate, to ask for help, to get their needs met in culturally and socially acceptable ways, to get along with others. Social skills help kids to make friends, to retain friendships, to develop healthy relationships. Very important. The second component. And you can see here that schools are aware of this. I mean, a lot of schools use these kind of posters to reinforce in the classroom, let's work on social skills. Well, what we found is they're critically important in the well adjustment of high ability youngsters. So we have emotional intelligence and social skills. And the third and final super trait in my model are character strengths. In 2004, a groundbreaking book was published by Peterson and Seligman entitled Character Strengths and Virtues. And they identified in this huge volume 24 character strengths that they argued cut across all cultures, historically went back 3,000 years, and help explained what's important in the lives of all humans. And in our research lab, we focus narrowly on these character strengths as they impacted the lives of high ability and gifted youngsters. Examples of character strengths that Peterson and Seligman talk about include curiosity, love of learning, integrity, honesty, kindness, compassion, humility, not being arrogant, but being humble, being fair. These are the kind of character strengths that Peterson Seligman said cut across all cultures and have been around for thousands of years, and we agree. And we investigated in our labs these 24 character strengths with high ability and gifted youngsters. And in our labs, what we found in working with high ability and gifted youngsters, we came up with what we call 8 signature character strengths that really make a profound difference in the lives of successful gifted youngsters. And they are humility, empathy, kindness and compassion, gratitude, enthusiasm, persistence, or what researchers now are calling grit, teamwork and cooperation, and honesty and integrity. Those 8 signature character strengths play a profound impact in the successful lives of gifted youngsters in conjunction with social skills and emotional intelligence. I should point out, my publisher would be upset if I didn't, that my gifted rating scale published by MHS has just gone through a revision, and we now have a new scale that's a parent form that actually is based on the signature character strengths that we found that make a difference in the lives of gifted youngsters. So with the new GRS2 published by MHS, we actually have items that parents complete that measure social emotional skills underlying my character strengths model. Examples: does the child handle stress well, control their anger effectively, make good choices in social situations? So we felt that we wanted to have our scale tap into the character strengths underlying strengths of the heart. Okay, let me bring this short presentation together with 3 conclusions about strengths of the heart. As you've heard me say, they do make a huge difference in optimizing the well-being, the successful lives of gifted kids as they grow up. One conclusion: we can measure social skills in the schools, in the home. We can measure emotional intelligence. There are ways to measure that. And we can measure character strengths. In fact, many schools based on social emotional learning are already doing a great job of measuring character strengths. So these 3 super traits within my model of strengths of the heart can be measured. Second conclusion is that research now indicates quite conclusively that educators and parents can teach these super traits, and they can refine and enhance them. This is really exciting. So we can measure them and we can enhance them. And third and final conclusion based on our understanding of the life of the gifted youngster, they make a huge difference in their success. They make a huge difference in their well-being, in their psychological health. So we're real excited that we're able to provide this triple lens through which we can understand the healthy adjustment of gifted and talented youngsters. A new book just published by Routledge, Parenting from the Heart, Raising Resilient and Successful Smart Kids, provides an awful lot of information on my model. If this presentation sparked any interest, I encourage you to visit the Routledge website and get a copy of the book. I think it makes a difference in enhancing the well-being of all gifted youngsters. There's also a very recent post online on the Creativity Post, the link here, that provides information on resilience and mental health competence among successful, smart kids. So I encourage you to visit that as well. I want to thank you for the opportunity to listen to me talking about something that I've really spent my career focusing on. Real excited to be able to bring the positive psychology perspective to the successful lives of gifted and talented youngsters. I wish you all much success in your work, I assume, with gifted and talented and high ability children. And I hope during my next visit to Spain that I have an opportunity to meet you in person. I wish you well.
Yo también lo espero, que nos veamos pronto. Gracias por tu
I do
exposición.
hope we will see
Bueno,
each
por
other soon. Thank you
último,
very much for your
es especialmente
presentation.
emocionante para
It's been
mí
very
compartir
exciting
espacio
to
con él,
share this session
del que tanto
with
he aprendido
a
y
person
aprendo
I
cada día,
continue to
Javier
learn every
Tobrón.
day. He's been
No solo ha sido
my
mi maestro, mi mentor, sino que también es
teacher
mi
and
director.
my director,
A
my
él
thesis
le
director,
debo la pasión
and
con la
I've
que me he entregado en
dedicated my
este
full
campo de
passion to
estudio y
this
práctica
field for the
educativa desde hace
23
23
last
años.
year. Thanks to him, he is
Javier
a
Tobrón es
professor at
catedrático emérito de la
UNIR,
Universidad Internacional de
de
La
La
Rioja,
Rioja.
UNIR,
He
en
used to
el que
be
fue
head
director de
of
innovación y desarrollo
innovation
educativo.
in education, and
Ha
he's
sido pionero en
pioneered
nuestro
the
país en el
research of
estudio
high
e
ability
investigación de
in
las
our
altas
country.
capacidades,
He
poniendo en
has
marcha
started
iniciativas de gran
very
calado como
far-reaching
la validación
initiatives
del
such
SCAR,
as the SCAR,
la
the
aplicación del
talent
modelo de
chart
identificación del
model
Talent
for
Search
more than 10
durante
years.
más de una década,
He's
la
behind the
creación del
creation
Centro para la
of
Atención Educativa de
the
Alumnos de Alta
CTI
Capacidad, CTI
Spain,
España,
charter
Charter
member of
Member de
CTI
la
of John
CTY de
Hopkins
la Universidad Johns
University,
Hopkins,
and he's
o
done a
todo el
lot of
trabajo
work
que ha
over the
desarrollado en
last
estos
few
últimos
years,
años
adapting and
con la
translating
adaptación y
into
traducción
Spanish
al
the
castellano
SEM
del
model
modelo
or the
SEM
Renzulli
o de la
learning
plataforma Renzulli
platform,
Learning,
among other
entre otros.
things. Many
Muchos de los
um,
autores y modelos
of
internacionalmente
the
reconocidos
best
en el mundo de las altas capacidades
lecturers
han sido
and
conocidos en nuestro
experts
país gracias a su amplísima
in
labor
high ability are
investigadora
known
y
in Spain
divulgativa.
thanks to his efforts.
Gracias,
Thank you,
Javier,
Javier,
por
for
traer
bringing
a
your
tus
friends to
amigos a
this
este
event
evento
and
y estar
joining
hoy con
us
nosotros.
here today.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very
Buenas
much
tardes.
and good afternoon.
Bueno, para mí es un
It really is a
placer estar
pleasure
aquí
to be here
en
today,
tan buena compañía.
surrounded by good
Y
friends.
claro, en cierto modo, uno siente siempre
In a way, I
que
always feel
somos
I'm just
enanos
a
a
very
hombros de
tiny
gigantes, ¿no?
person on the shoulders of
Pero bueno, así se
giants. But this is
construye
how
la
science
ciencia, así se
knowledge
construye el
is
conocimiento, así se construye el
built.
saber.
We've just
Acabamos de
listened
oír dos
to
presentaciones que a mí me
presentations
parece
that are
son
just
soberbias y que merecen la pena
amazing, beautiful, and I
ser
believe they
estudiadas con
deserve
detalle
detail
cuando llegue el vídeo que se
study
producirá
once we receive the video
después
that
de
will be
este
produced after
evento.
the event.
Es
It's
muy
very interesting
interesante
to go to the
acudir a las fuentes
sources
que se han
mentioned,
citado
and
y
there
algunas
are
otras
other
fuentes
sources
que
as
yo
well that I would
compartiré,
like to share on my
compartiré en el
blog,
blog y también algunas se
and
irán
other
compartiendo
sources of
durante
information
el
that we
desarrollo
will be sharing today.
de este evento.
So,
Ya se han mencionado algunas cosas,
the SEM book
como es el libro del SEM,
or
son
Renzulli
200
Learning have been
páginas
brought
sobre
up
Renzulli
already.
Learning, etcétera. Yo, antes de
Before I
comenzar con
start
mi
with my
exposición,
presentation,
lo que quiero poner o que quiero
I would
enfatizar
really
es
like to
lo
highlight
importante
that
que es la
research
investigación,
is
lo importante que
absolutely
es la
paramount. Training
formación de las
people
personas.
is
Es decir, la
paramount.
investigación,
Pedagogy and
la pedagogía, la
psychology
psicología también son
are
saberes
applied
aplicados.
fields.
Lo que
We research
investigamos
because
es para que se
we
ponga en
need
marcha en las
to
aulas, en el trabajo de
start
las
doing
personas,
things
en la
differently
familia, en la
at
escuela,
work, at
etcétera, ¿no?
home,
Entonces,
at school, and so on.
yo, lógicamente, por mi profesión de tantos años,
After
lo
many
que
years
pongo
in this
siempre muy en primer
profession,
plano es
I've come
apoyemos
to
nuestras
realize that we
acciones
really need to
en
support our
evidencias
actions on
y no en
evidence, not on
opiniones.
opinions. What we
Procuremos que lo que
do needs to
hacemos
be
esté
backed
respaldado por la
by
investigación.
research.
Yo
I
recuerdo
remember
cuando
when I
era
was
profesor
a
en activo,
professor,
a
I
mis
would always
alumnos
tell my
siempre les decía,
students,
ustedes nunca
don't
discutan de
discuss the
ninguna cuestión
pedagogy,
pedagógica,
ask
ustedes
people,
pregunten a
what
la
have
gente,
you
¿sé
read
de esto
about
que ha
this?
leído?
And they say, well,
Dice,
you
bueno, es que
know,
ya se sabe,
it's a matter
es
of
que sobre
taste.
gustos no
And
hay
I would
nada
always
escrito.
answer,
Dice, perdone, no,
no,
no, no, no.
no,
Sobre
there is
gustos
a
está todo
lot
escrito. Lo que
written,
pasa es que probablemente usted no se lo ha leído.
but you might not have
Entonces,
read it.
hay mucha
So
investigación.
there is a lot
Es
of
cierto
research,
que hay aspectos en el
and
ámbito en el
just
que nos
like
movemos, como
in
en tantos
any
otros
other
en la
walk
vida,
of life,
que
there
admiten
can be a
enfoques
different
diversos,
approach to
pero
things,
hay
but
enfoques que
some
son correctos y
approaches are
otros que no lo
right
son.
and others are
Hay
not.
enfoques que están
Some
apoyados
approaches
en
are backed
evidencias
by
y otros que no
evidence
están
and
apoyados
others
por
are
ninguna
not.
evidencias. Yo quiero tocar un punto
I would
hoy
like to touch upon a point during
en
my
mi
presentation
presentación
today.
que ah, bueno, yo lo he titulado así,
And I
supongo
understand
que
that you will see the
podremos ver ahora la
presentation soon.
presentación,
I've titled this
que es, lo he
Identifying
titulado La
High
identificación de las
Ability
altas capacidades, la gran
Remains a
asignatura pendiente.
pending task.
Porque es
Why
la
am I
gran
saying
yo
this?
supongo que se puede ver ahora o se verá enseguida en la pantalla la presentación
Let's see if we can get the
que yo
slides
he
on the
preparado,
screen.
porque tiene una serie de números
There are a
que
few figures on my presentation that I
compartir,
would like
me
to
gustaría
share with
compartir con todos.
everyone.
Entonces,
Give me just a minute.
perdón, solo un segundo, porque ya se sabe que si por mucho que lo ensayes, siempre hay
We've rehearsed this,
algo
but
que
there we
ahora debe
go.
estar.
I couldn't figure out
Siempre hay
all the
hay-
clicks.
te
Anyway,
ha faltado un clic.
here we are.
Bueno, no importa. ¿Por qué lo he llamado así?
So this remains a
porque
big
este es el gran
problem, and
problema.
that's
Es decir,
why I titled
cuando
my
nosotros oímos
presentation.
a
So
profesor
when
Renzulli,
when we listen to
hablar de
Professor
SEM,
Renzulli talking about the school
hay ahí una
enrichment
evolución
model,
además interesantísima,
well,
que es
there is a very
que
interesting
hemos
point.
pasado
We are
de
no
hablar
longer
de
talking
la
about
educación de las personas de alta
educating
capacidad
gifted
a hablar
children,
de
but
una, como
rather
dicen los ingleses,
the British
esto es
put
una
it
frase de los ingleses,
as
que
follows.
dice, dejemos de hablar
We're not talking
de
about the education of the gifted, but rather about gifted education for all.
Es decir, que hemos hablado de...
There are many books.
Hay muchos
Professor
libros, por ejemplo,
Pfeiffer,
el
for
profesor Pfeiffer
example,
ha escrito un
wrote
libro
a
muy
book
interesante que se llama
titled
Serving the
Serving the
Gifted.
Gifted.
Pero
Now, the thing is
realmente
that
ya
we're
no
not
estamos hablando de serving the
talking
gifted.
about
Estamos
serving
hablando de
the
serving
gifted. We're
all
talking about
students.
serving
Estamos
all
hablando de
students. We need to
servir a
serve
todos
all
los
students in a
estudiantes en la escuela.
school.
Por eso, el modelo de para dentro de
And
la
that's
escuela
why
o
the
el
type 1,
enriquecimiento de
2,
tipo
and
1, 2 y
3
3 del SEM
school-wide
es tan
enrichment
importante
models
porque
are
no
so
solamente
important because they not
afecta,
only have
influye,
impact and
impacta
influence on
positivamente
those
en las personas más
that
capaces,
are
sino que
gifted
impacta en todos los
but
alumnos. Y
or
así
highly
se
able,
cumple
but
aquello
the models
de
have
que la
impact on
escuela lo que
everyone
tiene que
because
hacer es
schools
promover el
must
óptimo
promote
desarrollo de
the
cada uno de
optimal
los
development of
escolares,
all its
tengan estos
students,
mucha capacidad
regardless of
o
ability.
poca capacidad. Pero claro, todavía estamos
No,
muy lejos de esto,
we're
que sería,
still
digamos,
far
sería el
from
desideratum,
reaching
sería
this
el óptimo, ¿no?
optimal level.
Yo a
And I
veces
often
hago,
ask
me hago
myself
estas
these
dos
two
preguntas. Es
questions.
decir, ¿saben los
Do
profesores
teachers
cuál es la
know
capacidad
what
de sus
is
alumnos para
their
el aprendizaje?
students' giftedness
O
for
comprueban lo que
learning?
saben y lo que
Do
saben
they
hacer
check what they
para
know
por
and
hacer una
can do to
programación
then
y programar
program
el itinerario de
a
aprendizaje
curriculum
de
for
cada uno?
each?
Sí,
Or
o
let
si
me say
quieren
it
lo
in
digo de
other
otra manera.
words.
¿Es
Can
posible
we
educar a una persona
teach a kid or plan
desarrollo
their
sin
development
conocer
without
cuáles son sus
knowing
fortalezas,
their
cuáles son sus
strengths,
capacidades,
their
cuáles son sus
interests,
intereses, cuáles
their
son sus preferencias de
giftedness,
aprendizaje,
their
cuáles son sus
preferences.
strengths of the
What are their
heart,
strengths of their
porque ya
hearts?
supondrán
Because as you
que las
can very
personas que
well
hemos traído aquí
imagine, the speakers
hoy
we've brought
en
to
este
you
simposio
today have not been
no las hemos
chosen
traído
randomly.
aleatoriamente y los
And
discursos que
we've had
ellos han
to
establecido, que
limit
hemos
the
tenido que
time
limitarlos en
given
el
to them
tiempo,
to talk,
tienen una
but
conexión muy
their
importante.
talks are both
Estamos hablando
very
de
much
que
connected.
lo que acabo de decir hace un momento, las escuelas, y lo decía
In
una de
one
las
of the
primeras
initial
diapositivas del
slides
profesor
presented by Renzulli,
Renzulli, las
you could
escuelas
see
tienen que ser
how
ámbitos
schools
de
must be an
desarrollo del talento
environment
de
where
todos
all
los
students
estudiantes. ¿De qué
develop
talento? Cada
their
uno el que tenga.
giftedness,
Pero claro,
whatever
ahora
it
aquí nos
is.
estamos fijando en
Now we're
la
talking
rama,
about
en la
the
parte superior, que son los
higher
más perjudicados
giftedness
muchas
or
veces
higher ability.
de
And
los
because
grados
this
de
is not a
talento, porque
matter
esto no
of
es un problema de
ability,
ser
as you
o no ser,
all know, and
como
you
ya
know
todo el
that
mundo
high
sabe.
ability
Bueno, pues yo me
sometimes is
hacía
not
estas dos preguntas,
addressed.
pero
But
realmente
do
nuestros
our
profesores
teachers
saben cuál es la
really
capacidad de
know
los alumnos
our
y
kids'
por tanto qué pueden
ability? Do
esperar
they
de ellos o
really
cómo les
know
pueden
how to challenge and
retar
get the
esa
most
capacidad.
out of
Y
their
dos, ¿saben
ability?
lo que saben y lo que no saben? Bueno, esto
So
se
the answer is
resuelve en
summarized in
dos
2
cosas, que
points.
es
First,
identificación
the
del
potential
potencial
needs to
y
be
establecimiento de los
identified, and we need
estándares de
to
rendimiento.
establish
Es
performance
decir,
standards, meaning
uso
we need
cabal
to
de la
use
evaluación formativa
the
y del feedback. No voy a entrar ahora
feedback
en las modificaciones que se están
and
poniendo en los
the learning. And
currículos,
I'm not going to
en
go
el
into the
descenso del nivel de
curriculums or the
exigencia de muchas
level
cosas,
of
porque
demand,
esto
because
obviamente
definitely
perjudica
that
a
is a
toda la
hindrance for
población escolar,
all
pero
students.
claro, oiga,
But definitely,
cuanto
the
más
higher
arriba
the
esté usted en
ability,
esa escala,
the
más perjudicado va a
worse the
ser. Bueno,
hindrance.
yo quiero mostrar una cuestión, no
So
quiero,
I don't want
digamos,
to
abusar de los
show
números,
too
por
many
tanto yo,
numbers. This is
como
just,
esto
I
además
just
va a
wanted to
quedar
put this
aquí,
on the
yo
table.
simplemente lo que voy a hacer es, digamos,
Let me just
enfatizar o
highlight a
destacar
few points.
alguna cosa particular.
On the
Ya ven que hay
right,
una
you see that
parte
I've
en la
covered
derecha que de
a
momento está tapada,
section.
pero
I'm not
esto es,
really
no me interesa
interested
el número
in
exacto
the
en
exact figure,
conceptualmente en lo que vamos a
but
hablar, sino me
really
interesa
the
más la
order of
magnitud.
magnitude.
La
There are
magnitud es, tenemos 8.200.000
8,200,000
estudiantes
students,
y de
and
esos
we've
hemos
identified
identificado
close
cerca
to
de 41.000.
41,000.
Pues
So
41.000 de 8
that's
millones, los números que están ahí son el
0.5%.
0,5%. Hombre, es que
Let's
en
say in
Andalucía, por ejemplo,
Andalusia,
lo están
they've
haciendo muy bien, porque fíjese usted,
identified
tienen identificado 16.000
16,000
frente a
after
468
compared
en
with
La Rioja.
400 in La
Bueno, un
Rioja.
momento. ¿Qué
But what is the
porcentaje de su población
percentage?
tienen identificados en Andalucía? Pues el 1,07, es decir, una
That is a really
proporción
low percentage.
misérrima. O en
Murcia,
Murcia también hay
same.
razones de por qué esto
There
es
are
así, pero
reasons
no
for
voy a
this,
entrar yo en
but
detalles
I
porque
don't
no
want to go
tenemos
into the details,
y no quiero
really.
yo tampoco abusar.
So in Murcia,
Murcia,
they've
pues,
identified
tienen identificados
3,000, but
3.000,
it's
claro, pero es que
3,000
3.000
out
de
of
300.000,
300,000.
pues
That's
efectivamente es un 1%.
1%.
Eso es mucho. Y hay otros, entonces, pero claro,
How
y
is
dice, oiga,
this
¿y esto cómo es
possible?
posible? Bueno, esto ya
Well,
primero nos
first of
plantea un
all, we
problema
see that
que es
there's
que no
no
hay un proceso de
systematic
identificación
approach to
sistemático
identifying
que
students
abarque a todo el
across our
territorio
nation.
nacional. De tal
So
manera que uno
a kid
será
may
o
or
no
may
será,
not
tendrá o no tendrá
have
alta capacidad,
high
más que ser,
ability,
es tener,
depending on where they
pues, según
are.
donde esté. Pues oiga, en fin,
Anyway,
bueno,
so
problema
0.5%. Now,
0,5%. Pero vamos,
and you can see the
por tanto aquí están los
percentages.
porcentajes en cada una de las regiones.
And in no
Ya
case,
ven
we're
que en
north of
ningún caso pasa
1%, a
del
very
1%, de
modest
un modesto
1.1
si
if you
redondeamos
round
los
up the
valores
figure
de
in
Andalucía.
Andalusia. Now let's go to
Bien,
the right
pero vamos a la parte
side.
derecha de la tabla. ¿Y si
What
resulta que por lo
if
menos
there
hubiese
were at least
10% de alumnos
10% of
que
students
necesitaran una
that need
atención educativa
differentiated
diferenciada o un nivel
education
de
or a
reto superior al que
a more
produce
challenging environment?
Esto es un poco retórico lo que estoy diciendo, porque realmente no hay
And
más
this is
enfoque de la
rhetorical, I
educación que
know,
la educación
because
personalizada. Pero bueno,
education by
vamos a
definition
suponer
should be
que esto
personalized.
fuera
But
así.
let's say
Pues hombre, que ya el
10%
10% de
of
los que más
the
corren
best
necesitan una
runners
pista, o
or
el
the
10% de los que más
jumper,
saltan
the
altura,
highest
pues
jumpers
necesitan
in
unos
track field
saltómetros
need
pues un poco,
something a bit more
pues
demanding.
fíjese, quiere decir, ahí tienen los
Well, what
valores de qué
deficit would
déficit
this
supondría esto.
represent?
Si esos, perdón, que me he saltado, porque he tocado
So
donde
imagine
no
we're
debía,
talking about
fuesen el
10%.
10%.
How do we fall
¿Y
short?
si
By
fueran,
how much? Imagine
bueno,
it
vamos
is
a
a
decir, pues solo el
5%.
5%? Y ahí
And
tienen al
then
final, si quieren, en la barra de
at
abajo, pues
in the
quiere
bottom,
decir
you
que
see
en
that
el primer caso tendríamos un
we
déficit de
have
identificación
missed
suponiendo que los identificados
identification of a
están
large
correctamente
percentage. And
identificados,
I'm
etcétera,
not
que
even going
tampoco
to
voy a
talk
entrar en esa
about
batalla ahora mismo.
whether
Pero
the ones
fíjense,
we've
sería
identified
el
are well identified, but it means we have
95%
a
de déficit.
95%
Quiere decir,
deficit.
el
So
95%
95%
no
of students
estarían
are not
identificados.
identified.
Y si estos
And if we're
fueran el
talking about a
5% solo,
5%,
naturalmente esto
and
es
this is
mera
rhetorical, okay? Because there is no
retórica,
way
porque
to
no hay modo de
define it
decir
should
si
be
es
a
un
10 or a
5%, 10%,
5%.
15%, lo que fuere, por otras razones que ahora no
We
son
would
del
be
caso,
talking
pues
about
estaríamos hablando de un
90%
déficit del
of
90%.
high ability
Por
students
tanto,
that
si
go
tuviéramos que resumir en una frase, diríamos, oiga,
unnoticed.
¿sabe qué le digo?
So I would
Que
say that
entre el
90 to
90 y el 95% de
95%
los alumnos que
of
presumiblemente
this
tendrán alta capacidad
of the students
y
in this
por
group
tanto necesitarán una
have
estimulación
high abilities, and therefore
adecuada
they
en la
need
escuela que no están
a
recibiendo, son,
different
pues lo que he dicho, entre el 90 y el
stimulation at school, something that
95%.
they are
Esto
not
produce
receiving.
bueno, imagínense esto qué
Imagine the
impacto
impact
tiene en
this
el
might
desarrollo
have
social
on
y
the social
emocional de
and
estas
emotional
personas, ¿no?
development of
Bueno,
these kids.
uno
And
podría
then
decir,
you'll
no,
say,
no, pero si
well,
esto va
we're
bien,
doing
esto
great.
va
Well,
bien.
it really does
Bueno, va bien
depend
según con qué ojos lo mire
on
usted,
who's
claro.
looking at
En el
this.
año
In 2011,
2011
we had
teníamos 8.600 alumnos
8,600.
identificados.
When
Estos
I
son,
say
voy a decir,
identified,
cuando digo
it's quote
identificados, digo
unquote, okay? These
identificados
are
entre
numbers from
comillas,
the
son
ministry.
números del ministerio,
And I'm
en fin,
not
y
going
no
to
voy a
go
ahora
into
entrar en cómo
how
han
they
sido
were
identificados
identified
o en qué, en fin, porque estamos acostumbrados,
because
ahora,
we
ahora me
are
referiré a
used
esto, a los
to
puntos de
cutoff
corte,
points
a
and
cuestiones
matters
que la investigación ha
that, well,
desechado
research has
hace
left
muchísimo
behind
tiempo. Pero bueno,
a long
es
time ago.
cierto
But in
que del
any
año
case, from
2011-12
2011 to
hasta el
2021,
2021, que son los
which are the
últimos datos que yo he
latest
sido capaz de
figures
encontrar en la,
available on the
la
ministry
página del
website, we've
ministerio,
gone
pues
from
bueno, hemos pasado de
8,600 to
8.600 a 40.000.
40,000.
Oiga,
We're doing
qué
great,
bien
wouldn't you
vamos.
think so?
Oiga, claro,
But
pero si resulta,
let's
déjenme que se lo plantee de
look
esta
at this
manera.
from a different point of view.
Vamos a ver, si tenemos
So
grosso
roughly
modo
there are
8.300.000
8,300,000
alumnos, y
students,
ahora voy
okay?
a hacer una cosa, voy a hacer una pequeña
Now, let's
maldad,
say,
que es decir, bueno, vamos a
let's
suponer que
suppose the
efectivamente la
administration
administración
is
tuviese razón
right,
y hay unas personas
and
que
there
son
are high ability
de alta
students and
capacidad y otras
others that
que
are
no
not
son.
high
Y
ability.
además que hay un
And let's
punto de
say
corte,
there's a
eso que estoy
cutoff
diciendo es
point, which from a
insostenible, lo
research
digo de la
standpoint
manera que se
cannot
entiende,
be
en fin,
supported. But let's
escenificando el
say
problema.
the IQ
Tienen
is
un CI de
130.
130, ahora
We'll
hablaré
talk
del
more
CI.
about IQ later.
Y
But
bueno, pues diríamos, oiga, y
given
en
all
una
that,
población normal, una población como España,
in a
pues,
population such as
¿cuántas
Spain,
personas
how many
tienen
people have a
un CI de
QI of
130? La
130?
respuesta, pues una respuesta matemática, es
2.28%.
2,28%.
Because
El CI
130
130 en una curva
IQ in a
normal
normal
significa
curve
que
is
el valor
2
130
standard
está dos
deviations
desviaciones típicas
above.
por encima.
The
Las
standard
desviaciones típicas
deviation
son 15
is
puntos
15 points,
y
the
la
average
media
is
de esta
100, so
distribución son 100,
100 plus
100
15
más
and
15 más
15
15,
is
130,
130, that's a
2,28%. Si realmente
2.28%.
esto fuese
If this
cierto,
were the
que no lo
case,
es
which
en
is
modo alguno,
not
pero
the
si lo
case in any
fuese,
way,
tendrían que
we
estar
should have
identificados
identified
189.239.
189,239 students.
Quédense con este dato un momento.
Imagine it's
Bueno,
not
no, pero no
2%,
serán el
it's
2%, serán el
5%.
5%.
Well,
Pues entonces
then we
tendrían que
should
estar
have
identificados
identified
415.000.
415,000.
Oiga, ¿y si
And let's say
¿y si el 10% de los alumnos
10%,
más altos necesitaran,
10% of
pues
the students
entonces son
have this type of
830.000
IQ? We
alumnos
should
los
have
que tendrían que estar
identified
identificados.
830,000. And if we're talking about a 15% students who need some type of additional encouragement or different speed, then we're talking about 1,245,000. The reality
¿Cuál
is
es la realidad?
40,916 based on official figures.
No, 40.916, porque aquí
And I want to
número
give you
arriba,
the
un número
full
abajo, es
number
una persona
because
y es
one
una
number
familia que sufre
more or
lo
less
que ellos saben.
represents a
Pues
family
mire usted,
with
si
a
tomo
particular situation.
el valor de la
So if you take the number from the public
administración,
administration,
y
and
eso
that should
me
take me
debería
to
llevar a 189.000 alumnos, y
189,000
tengo,
students, and I've
simplemente
only
identificados 40.000,
identified
pues digamos usted, o ha habido una migración no conocida
40,916.
de
Well,
personas de talento de
either
España
there's
a
been a
otros países,
migration
o aquí
abroad
pasa algo. Por
of
tanto,
gifted
quiere decir
children or
que
something is
sobre el
going
si fuera
on.
un 5%, tenemos casi un
We've only
10%
identified
solo
10%
identificados, Si
imagine
fuese un 2,28,
um,
pues lo que ahí digo, el
that
20%,
this
eso quiere
means that we
decir
have
que
not
no están
identified between
identificados
80 to
entre el 80 y el
90% of the
90% de los
students.
alumnos.
And
Probablemente más.
probably there will be
Aquí
more.
me ha acogido, digamos, incluso al
And I'm
beneficio
using here the
de que solo
benefit of the
fuera.
doubt.
Porque es como
Imagine,
cuando se dice, no, es que la
let's say
Organización
the
Mundial de la
World
Salud dice
Health
que
Organization says that,
las personas de alta capacidad, bueno, lo dice de otra manera, no
well,
lo dice
it's
de
not
ninguna
the
manera. Digo, la
WHO,
gente
it's
dice que la OMS
people
dice,
say that the WHO
la OMS
says.
no
The
tiene
WHO
nada que
has
decir
nothing
sobre esto,
to
porque eso no es un problema
do with
médico, es un
this because
problema
this is a
clínico, por lo tanto, de
clinical
eso no saben
issue,
nada.
first.
Punto
And
uno. Y
second,
punto
nobody
dos,
has ever been
jamás
able
nadie ha sido
to
capaz de encontrar un
find a
documento donde
document
tal
with
cosa se
this
diga.
information.
Por
So
tanto,
we
dejemos
shouldn't
ya
say
de
this.
decir que, porque decir que
Doesn't matter. Are we
son,
talking
pero me
about
da igual que sea el
2.28,
2,28, que el 5,
5,
que
or
el 10%, es
10%?
como decir
If
que
there
hay un
is,
10% o un
it's just
5%
like
de niños
saying
en la
there's
población escolar que
5
tienen
or
6 dedos en la
10%
mano
of
derecha.
children who
Y
have
hay otros que
6
solo tienen
fingers in their
5. Los que
hand and the
tienen
rest have
6,
5. So
esos
that's
son.
not how it
Esto
works,
no funciona
right?
así. Esto
There's a
funciona de otra manera
continuum.
mucho más continua. Y
It
es decir,
means
que las
that each of
personas
us
tenemos unas
has
capacidades, tenemos unas aptitudes,
abilities and
tenemos unas
weaknesses
fortalezas,
and
tenemos unas
strengths.
debilidades. Es decir, somos,
And all of these things that we
integramos todas
study
esas
are
cosas que estudiamos de
integrated
una manera sui
differently
generis y
into
cada uno
each
es
and every
como
one
es.
of us.
Y
And
en
depending
función
on
de
who
eso,
we
lo que
are, we need
necesita
a
es un
specific
estímulo adecuado para
stimulus to
desarrollar su potencial y convertirlo en
realize our full
crecimiento.
potential.
Miren, ¿saben qué pasa en la
Now, what
realidad
happens when you
cuando
go to a
uno va
school
a un centro
and
educativo
the
e
students are
identifica y
identified and
evalúa a
assessed?
sus
This is
alumnos?
a
Es una
slide we've put
diapositiva que
together a
hicimos ya
long
hace
time ago.
tiempo.
Martha
Esta le gusta
enjoys
mucho a
this one
Marta,
very much
con
because
razón,
we've
porque hemos
assessed
evaluado a 1.293 alumnos y nos hemos encontrado
1,293 students
de,
from many
de
different
centros muy
centers,
diferentes, públicos,
chartered,
no públicos,
public,
concertados,
private,
ikastolas,
schools in different
en fin,
languages. And we
caramba,
found
y
that
nos hemos encontrado que
178 out of the
178 de esos 1.293 tenían un
1,293
percentil por encima
have
del
a percentage
95%.
higher than
Algo habría que hacer
10%.
con ellos,
We're
¿no?
actually
Que
talking
suponía
about
un 14%.
14%.
Bueno,
This
entonces, esto
means
quiere decir
that
que cuando
if we
nosotros
want
queremos
to
poner en marcha cualquier proceso de
identify
identificación, la
students,
identificación
well,
arroja
the
los resultados que
results
uno
yielded
presume que
are
sobre
what they
todo que
are.
nos permite,
And in
porque
our
en los procesos de
evaluation
evaluación que nosotros
processes,
hacemos,
we
lo que
assess
hacemos es
all the
evaluar a todos
students,
los
and then we
alumnos
only
y solo
reassess the
reevaluamos
ones
a
with
aquellos que
very
tienen
high
puntuaciones muy altas por una
scores
razón que
for
explicaré en un
a
segundo.
reason I
Y
will
entonces
explain
dice,
shortly.
bueno,
So we
evaluamos a
assess
todos.
everyone,
De ahí
and
se
this means
colige que
that
unos tienen
some
una
have
capacidad
average
media, unos
ability,
tienen una capacidad
others have
más baja, otros
lower
tienen una capacidad más
ability,
alta,
others have
otros tienen una
high
capacidad muy
ability,
alta
and
y otros
others
tienen una
have
capacidad
extremely
altísima.
high
De tal
ability.
forma que esto
Just
es lo
like
mismo que el
biking,
ciclismo. No todos los
not
niños que
all
hacen
children who
ciclismo
start
ganarán
biking
6
will
veces el
eventually
Tour de
win the Tour
Francia,
de
ni
France
todos
3
los niños que
times,
están en una
and
escuela
not
de
everyone in
tenis
a tennis
ganarán
school
todos
will
12 veces
win
el Roland
Roland
Garros.
Garros
Hay
12
una
times.
gradación de
So
capacidad que se
capacity,
proyectará, porque las
ability
personas además somos
will
libres y cada
be
uno ejecuta sus potencialidades
projected
como le
to a
parece, en
different
diverso grado.
extent.
Lo que
And
hay
what
que
you should
evitar en
avoid,
cualquier sistema
avoid in
educativo
any
es que
educational
no haya
system is
posibilidades
that
de que el que
if
quiera
you
ser
want to be a
pianista sea
piano
pianista.
player, you
Ese es el grave
cannot
problema.
become one.
Solo
Let me just
lo
quote
cito
this
porque luego ya esto quedará aquí, se podrá ver con más
for your
calma
reference
parando el
later.
vídeo. Hay gente
I
todavía, y
have a
aquí
quote
traigo al
from
profesor
Professor
Pfeiffer, una
Pfeiffer
cita
in
suya del 2015,
2015 here.
todavía
There
hay
are
gente que
still
cree que
people
las
who
personas
believe
nacen con un CI y
children
que el
are born
CI
with a
otra vez
certain
es como un
IQ, and the
cromosoma,
IQ is sort
o
of like a
que
chromosome.
la super no se sabe,
Or it's
que
like
es,
Renzulli
como dice
says,
Renzulli también,
talking about
hablando de este
this.
asunto, dice que
It's
es como si fuera
having a
un
golden
cromosoma de oro. No,
chromosome.
esto no
No,
es un
that's not
cromosoma
what
de
it
oro.
is.
Lo que hay que
We need
medir
to
son
measure
lo que ya he
different
dicho varias
areas, as
veces,
I've
¿verdad?
said,
El
the
grado
degree
de
of potential,
potencialidades
and
de
we
las
really
personas y
must
hacer que el potencial se
convert
convierta en
potential
rendimiento.
into
Y eso es el
performance.
éxito de la
That is
educación,
the
¿verdad?
success of
Bueno,
education.
pero Alan Kaufman, de una manera muchísimo
Anyway,
más
Kaufman very
cáustica,
clearly
digamos,
says
dice,
that the
hablando del CI,
IQ
dice, se
is
trata de una
just
estupidez,
silly. It
de
is a
una
very
interpretación
frequent
errónea muy
and wrong
frecuente. No existe tal
interpretation.
cosa como el
There's
CI
no
de una
such a
persona.
thing as the
Y que si
IQ
evalúas a
of
una
a
persona, bueno, está
person.
ahí la cita, si
If
evalúas
you
a una persona
assess a person 12 times, you will
12
receive
veces obtendrás
12
12
different
CIs
IQs.
diferentes.
And I'm
No
not
quiero con
saying
esto
the
decir que
IQ
el CI no
doesn't
significa
mean
nada. El
anything.
CI
It just
significa y
offers
aporta
a
una
data
información.
point.
Pero
But
en
in
modo
any
alguno
case,
es la información información que determina quién
it
es y quién
shouldn't
no es. En todo
be
caso, es una
considered
variable de síntesis
the definition
que,
of
bueno,
giftedness or
pues eso, en el
not.
mejor de los casos
It
nos
just
indica
indicates a
una
certain
cierta
ability.
capacidad de las Pero
However,
todavía creo yo
there
que hay
are
muchas gentes que no
many
aceptan
people who
o
just
no
can't
llevan
accept
a su
in their
realidad
day-to-day
operativa del día a día la
diversity.
diversidad.
So
Miren,
you
yo aquí
have
les
two
muestro dos
empirical
distribuciones
distributions here.
empíricas
This is the
de
direct
puntuaciones
verbal and
directas, tanto
mathematical
verbales como
score
matemáticas, en un test de
achieved.
competencia
So
verbal y otro de competencia, capacidad
ability
matemática,
in math
aptitud verbal,
and
aptitud
language, or
matemática,
quantitative
o
reasoning,
razonamiento
or
cuantitativo,
whatever
como
name you want to
quieran.
put on it.
Y
So
entonces fíjense, por
the
ejemplo, en
verbal
las
direct
puntuaciones
score
directas
goes from
verbales en este
0
test,
to
que va entre
50.
0 y 50. Pues ya ven, esto está medido
The
sobre unos 3.000
population
alumnos
is
aproximadamente de
3,000
tercero de
students
primaria.
in third
Pues
grade.
fíjense, ya se
A
ve
few
que hay
students,
algunos
very few,
alumnos pocos, ¿verdad?
score
Que tienen
very
unas
low.
puntuaciones muy bajas.
And there's probably some
Probablemente ahí
learning
haya alguna
difficulty to
dificultad de
work
aprendizaje
on
que
some
remover,
special
alguna atención especial que dedicar,
teaching to
pero claro,
offer.
¿y
But
qué
what
hay que hacer
happens
con
with the
estos
ones
otros
that
que
are
están
close
cerca
to
de
50, the
50,
ones with the
que
top
tienen las
scores? Well,
máximas
look at
puntuaciones? Ahora
this.
verán lo que pasa con esto.
We're going to
Lo
see that
mismo
in a minute.
podríamos decir, no me
Same
alargo,
could
con las
be
puntuaciones en la
applied
parte
to the
matemática.
mathematics
Claro, si
scores. Let's say a
tú,
7-year-old
niña de
girl who
7
has
años, ya te has
read the
leído
3
los 3
books of
tomos
the
del
Lord of
Señor
the
de los
Rings, and
Anillos
your
y tu
teacher
señorita se empeña en que tú sigas
insists
con
that
la
you need to
cartilla él me ama, mi
go
mamá me
level
ama,
1
yo amo a
basic
mi mamá,
reading, there is
pues tenemos un
clearly a
desfase
mismatch
entre la
between the challenge and
adecuación
the
del reto
intellectual
y del estímulo
stimulus
intelectual que esa
required
persona
and the
necesita
ability of
y
that
su capacidad o
girl.
su competencia.
Diversity
La diversidad
exists.
existe. Y esto, fíjense,
Every
yo
time
cada vez que
I
explico esta
explain
gráfica
this
me
graph,
pasmo.
and this is
Esto
based on
procede de datos
empirical
empíricos,
data, this is
por
not
tanto no
just
es
some
ninguna elucubración
whimsical
de nadie.
graph.
El 1%, uno podría decir,
So
hombre, entre
you
esos que
will say
puntuaban
that
allí
between
arriba
the ones that
50
score
y los
50 and
que
the ones
estaban
close to
cerca de
0,
cero, pues habrá entre ellos
there,
muchas diferencias.
there's a lot of people
Pero yo les
in
pregunté, ¿y los
between,
que estaban
right?
cerca de
But
50,
what about the ones that are
qué
close to
diríamos? ¿Que son más o
50?
menos todos
Are they
iguales?
all the
Pues
same?
hombre, la
Well, rule
intuición
of
nos dice,
thumb,
pues sí, hombre,
we
ellos
could
serán
think, yes,
entre
right,
el
between
percentil 99 y el
percentile
percentil
99
100, bueno, el
and
percentil 100, pero vamos,
and the
entre el
top,
99 y el tope, pues
they will
prácticamente
be
serán
all
más
the
o menos todos
same,
iguales.
one might think,
Pues eso
right?
es
Wrong, absolutely
completamente
wrong.
erróneo. Fíjense,
So
cuando a
students
esos
in
alumnos
the
que están en el
1%,
1%, y esto por ejemplo tiene unas
and this
consecuencias
has
para
impact on
la
how we
identificación y la
assess
evaluación de las capacidades de los alumnos
capacity.
extraordinaria. Jamás he visto aplicado esto más que en el modelo,
And
bueno,
this
lo hemos
is
hecho
in
nosotros en el
the
modelo de CTI
CTI
y
model
lo que
and
se
the
está haciendo
talent
ahora en el modelo de
search
Talent Search,
model.
el profesor Roberto Ranz con su
The professor
que
is
está
applying
aplicando
this
este modelo en la
model on
identificación
how
de niñas
we
para
identify
las
girls
disciplinas STEM.
for
Un
STEM.
proyecto
Anyway,
interesantísimo.
so that
Pues digo,
1%,
fíjense, ese
when you assess
1%
that
cuando
with
es
a
evaluado con
sufficiently
un test de
difficult
suficiente
test,
dificultad, se reproduce,
you'll
expresado de más
see
puntuaciones en puntuaciones de CI, que
a
es una
score
escala,
between
entre
135 and
135 y
200.
200.
So the
Es decir, que se reproduce
curve
toda la
is
curva normal.
reproduced in an above
Es
level
decir, que esos que
test.
están ahí
So
en el
that upper
1% es
1%,
como si les
one might
hubieran
think
parado
the
la
race
carrera
stopped
demasiado
too
pronto.
early for
Y
them, and
entonces
you might
aparecen como
think
iguales
that two very
personas que
different
son muy
people
diferentes.
look like the
¿Por
same.
qué aparecen como
Why?
iguales? Porque el test para ellos no tiene suficiente dificultad.
This
Esto es un
is
tema psicométrico
pure
elemental.
psychometric. The
No
test
tiene
cannot
suficiente capacidad de
discriminate,
discriminación.
and
Entonces,
people who
personas
have
que son
very
distintas,
different
muy distintas en su
ability
capacidad,
are
son
actually
vistas
seen
como
as the
iguales porque
same
el test no
because the
tiene
test
capacidad
cannot
para diferenciar.
differentiate.
Porque
There
no
are
tiene
no
ítems suficientemente
sufficiently hard
difíciles,
items on the
suficientemente
test
difíciles
for
para
the
los más
most
capaces.
able.
Bueno, esto tiene una consecuencia inmediata que hay que
Clearly,
entender.
there
Y
is
es que las diferencias de velocidad, de la velocidad de aprendizaje de los
consequence. The
alumnos,
speed of
incluso
learning
de la misma
of
edad, en
students
función de la
the
capacidad,
same
son
age
extraordinarias.
varies
Y por eso
tremendously
las diferencias en la
based on their
adaptación del
ability,
currículo
and
tienen
that's
que ser.
why the curriculum
Bueno, yo
must be adapted.
que creo que ya me estoy alargando y voy
Well, I
a
think I'm
parte de lo que tenía
extending
previsto, no lo
myself
voy a
too much,
decir.
but let
Quiero
me
mostrarles ahora esta
show you
diapositiva
this slide.
que se refiere a los... Estos son
These
datos
are
del
figures
modelo
on
del
the
SMPY, que es el precursor
SMPY model.
del CTI, del Center for
This
Talent and Youth, es el estudio de la
shows
precocidad de los jóvenes con precocidad
children with
matemática, empezado por Stanley en
early
los años 70 en
who
Baltimore,
learn maths very
y que
early.
acaba de
This
terminar un estudio
person just
longitudinal
started
a
with this
50
research in
años, empezó en el
72,
72
and in
y el 22
2022
ha terminado. Ahora
they
está
finished the
dirigido por
longitudinal
David
study.
Winsky y Camila Bembo.
There's a ton
toneladas
of
de
research
investigación
on
hechas sobre miles de
thousands
alumnos,
of
por tanto,
students. So this can
esto solo se puede
only
contrastar o se puede
be
contradecir
contrasted
con
with
otros datos
other experimental data that
experimentales
say
que digan
something
otra
different.
cosa, pero no con
But
opinión.
this
A mí
is
me
not a
parece, a mí
matter
no
of
me parece.
opinion.
Bueno, y quiere decir lo
We're
siguiente,
talking
fíjense,
about the top
estamos hablando del
1%
1%
that we
superior que
just
les
mentioned.
mencionaba hace
So
un momento.
if you
Pues si este
divide
percentil
that
99
percentile,
nosotros lo dividimos
99% percentile,
en
into
4
four
tramos,
sections, so
99,
99.99 to
25,
99.75, then
50,
0.50, then
ya se pueden imaginar
0.25.
que estas son diferencias en principio como minúsculas, ¿no? Que tenemos aquí a la
So
derecha. Pues fíjense,
you
esto es
have
el
quartile
1,
1, 2,
2,
3,
3, 4.
4. Now look at
Vamos
the
un momento a la
left.
parte izquierda. Fíjense,
Any measure
cualquiera de
here,
las medidas que tomemos aquí,
any doctorate,
tanto de
STEM
doctorado como
publication,
publicaciones STEM,
STEM
doctorados STEM,
doctor
etcétera,
rates, and so
cualquiera que
on.
tome, fíjense, en todos los
In all
casos son
cases,
puntuaciones extremadas.
the
Son resultados
result is
muy
very
evidentes. Pero
evident.
fíjense
Now,
que en todos los casos
Q1
los que están en Q1 tienen
are brilliant,
resultados
yes, but they're
siendo
not as
brillantes
brilliant as
menos que los que
Q2
están en
or
Q2, menos que
Q3,
los que están en Q3,
and then
menos que
even
los que están en
Q4.
Q4. Es decir, que
So
incluso en el
even within
1%
that top
superior hay tales
1%, there are
diferencias de
huge
capacidad
differences in
que se
ability.
plasman de esta manera tan llamativa
And you can
en
clearly see that
resultados
in
diferentes
outcomes
a
during
lo
a
largo de la vida.
lifetime.
Estamos hablando de un estudio
We're talking
de
about a population
miles
of
de
thousands
personas
of
que han sido
people,
seguidas
and
durante
they've been
50
monitored
años.
for
Esto,
more than 50
bueno, es el
years.
estudio
Definitely the
más grande,
largest
mucho más
piece of
grande y
research.
mucho más
Very
interesante,
interesting.
sin sacar el
Term as
mérito a la del
research
estudio de
25
Terman,
is also
que
very
empezó en el año
interesting.
25.
But in any case, if you
Yo, si
want a
quieren
quick
tener una visión
overview,
rápida sobre esto, aquí no nos
please
paramos ahora,
check out
pero
this
pueden
QR
capturar
code.
este
It's going to
código
take you
QR y
to a
les llevará a un
15-minute
vídeo de
video
15 minutos donde se
where
explica
this
el
research is
SMPY.
explained very well. It's in English,
Está en
but it's
inglés,
got
pero está
subtitles in
subtitulado en
Spanish.
español.
Quick
Es así,
learners,
aprendices rápidos,
high achievers.
estudiantes sobresalientes.
And it's totally
Merece, yo
worth
creo,
it.
mucho la pena, porque esto es lo mismo que
It really
responder
does
qué
respond
ocurre
to what
cuando realmente
happens.
atendemos a las personas. Nosotros
And I'm
funcionamos,
going
y
to
voy a
finish
terminar
with
con
this
esta
slide.
diapositiva, ¿eh? Nosotros siempre
We always
pensamos
think that
en que los alumnos
students
bueno, se mueven con arreglo
are to
a
be
la
placed
diagonal
somewhere on the diagonal,
y
right?
mm,
One might think
bueno,
8
pues lo normal,
years,
8 años, 8 cursos.
8 levels.
Y entonces,
And it seems we might
resulta
find,
que nos
well,
podemos
that's the
encontrar que esto es lo
conventional, right?
convencional.
For 8 years,
Durante 8 años los
children
alumnos
progress. It would
progresan, pues
be
esto sería
8
8
levels
cursos,
to
pues sería hasta
second
segundo de la ESO, por ejemplo,
year of
¿no?
secondary,
Pero claro,
but
resulta que
there
hay
are
alumnos
students that
que
have
tienen
difficulties
dificultades de
in
aprendizaje, dificultades que pueden
learning
ser
and other
incluso
things,
severas,
and in
y
8
entonces en 8
years
años
they just
no son capaces de cubrir
they can't
más
cover
que
it all.
o
They can
adquirir las
only cover the
competencias o los niveles de
competences
dominio,
or
como ustedes quieran
the,
llamarlo,
the
que
contents of
corresponden a 4
4
años, ¿no? Han
years
podido hacer
because
más porque su
their
velocidad de aprendizaje, con
speed
arreglo a su
is
capacidad, es muy
slower.
lenta. Y
And
no se
we're
puede,
meant to
está
assume
optimizado,
this is
vamos a suponer que está
optimized and there's no
optimizado y no
other
se
way
puede
to
hacer de
do
otra
that.
manera.
But
Pero
there
claro,
are
hay alumnos
students
que son
that
capaces en
in
4 años
4 years
de
can cover
cubrir los
the
8
8
cursos. Esto
levels.
es un gráfico, ya se entiende.
So
Entonces,
we
claro, o una
either
de dos, o
pay
atendemos
attention
a
to
las
these
diferencias
differences,
o
or
simplemente
we're
estamos
simply just
equivocando el
getting
planteamiento de la educación.
education wrong.
Entonces, cuando hablamos, esto sí me parece que es interesante dedicarle un par de minutos.
When we talk
Cuando
about
hablamos de la
identification,
identificación, yo
assessment,
estoy
or
hablando,
screening, I
o
mean
quiero hablar
different and
de varias
multiple
dimensiones. Por una
areas
parte,
like
la
the
competencia
curriculum
curricular es qué
competence. What
saben
can they
y qué
do?
saben hacer los
What are
alumnos. Qué saben
what is it
y
that
qué
they know
deberían
and they
saber.
should know? What is it
Qué
that they are
saben
willing to
y qué
learn?
querrían
And
saber. Bueno, y
this
esto,
would bring
pues,
us to
naturalmente, nos llevaría ahora a un desarrollo
a
que
completely
naturalmente
new
no es el objeto de
development.
este simposio, pero que tendría, como
And
mis dos
my two
predecesores,
previous
incoado
speakers have
algunas
shed some
cosas
light
y
on this
algunas
work,
ideas
and
de su
obviously they
trabajo,
would
pero
require
indudablemente
some
necesitarían
time and
días para
effort to
desarrollar
develop
todo
that.
esto, ¿no?
But
Pero bueno,
um,
yo les doy ahí una
if you take
pista.
a look at
Si
the
ustedes se van a ver el
TPI
modelo de
models
TPI,
for
que
the
es test diagnóstico y enseñanza
screening model,
prescriptiva,
the
el
optimal
optimal
match as well,
match,
which
que es
is the
este
optimal
engarce óptimo
link
entre
between
el ensamblaje
potential
óptimo entre el
and
potencial y el rendimiento.
performance.
Claro, bueno, lo que ahí dice, el
and
enfoque profesional,
curricular competence.
competencia
Like,
curricular.
do
¿Saben los profesores
teachers
lo que los alumnos
know
saben y
what
y
the
lo que no?
students
Para en
master or
función de eso
not?
programar el aprendizaje.
You know,
Mamá, vete tú al
because,
colegio, que yo me aburro.
if
La
you
señorita está
ask
explicando lo
students,
mismo
they
todos
can
los
tell
días.
you that the
Yo esto
teachers
ya
are
me lo sé.
repeatedly explaining
Bueno, o una
day
de
after
dos,
day
o
the
tenemos
same
una
old thing.
concepción permeable
So
del currículo, de la escuela, de los cursos, etcétera,
either we
etcétera,
have a conception that the
o tenemos
students
una
can
concepción de que el
really,
alumno debe
you know,
moverse por el
um,
currículo en función de su
have a
capacidad y
domain of the
nivel de dominio
curriculum, or perhaps we
demostrados,
did not
o si no,
understand
no hemos
anything at
entendido
all, or
nada.
perhaps the
O si no,
proportion of
la
talent will
promoción del talento
never, the
jamás se
talent will
producirá
never
en la escuela,
flourish
ni
of
del
the most
talento de los que
talented or
tengan
the
más
least
talento, ni del
talented.
talento de los que
So
tengan poco talento.
curriculum
Por tanto,
competences
competencia
are
curricular, asunto netamente de
this
los
is up to the
profesores, de la
teachers. Now,
didáctica,
intellectual
capacidades
capacities,
intelectuales
specific
específicas,
intellectual capacities,
más que
more than
generales, como una
general.
puntuación de CI. Una puntuación de CI,
An
ya me
IQ
he pronunciado
score,
sobre esto,
and let
que
alone
bueno,
if
ya
it
sí se
is
usa como
used
fuente
for
de corte para
cutoff.
decir quién es
But
blanco y quién es negro.
in
No,
any
no,
case,
pero
a
en cualquier
QI
caso
is
es
the
una puntuación de
synthesis. If the
síntesis. Si el
profile of
perfil
an
de una
individual
persona
is
fuese
individual, the
lineal,
average will obviously
la
represent the actual
media
situation.
representaría
But
bien
if
su
you
situación.
face
Pero
someone with
claro, si resulta
huge
que una persona tiene unas
capacities and low
capacidades altísimas
capacities and
y
somewhere
unas
else,
capacidades
the average will
bajísimas en otros,
only
la media lo
um,
único que
you
hace
know,
es como aquello que
harm,
decíamos un
because with
poco de broma, ¿no? Es decir, con
statistics,
las estadísticas se
if
demuestra
I
todo.
ate
Yo me
two
he comido
chickens
dos
and you
pollos, tú
ate
no te has comido
nothing, with
ninguno,
statistic,
y
it
con la
may tell
estadística
you
dicen
that
que
I
cada uno
ate
nos
one,
hemos
you
comido un
ate
pollo,
one,
pero la
but
realidad es
the
que tú te has
reality is
comido dos
completely different.
y yo no me
So
he comido ninguno. Bueno, pero esto es una
this is
dimensión,
why
por
it says
eso dice
specific,
capacidades intelectuales
intellectual
específicas.
capacities. And a
Bien,
third dimension,
y
which is
luego
very
una
much linked
tercera
to what
dimensión que está muy ligada
Stephen
con lo
Pfeiffer
que habló
mentioned, which are
Stephen
the
Pfeiffer,
soft skills.
que son las destrezas soft, que
I don't
bueno,
know
se
how
les
they
sale
call
mayores
them
porque se les llama
soft,
soft,
because it's not
porque de
soft at
soft
all,
no
but
tiene nada la motivación,
these are very
interés, el
valuable
trabajo.
skills.
Y para eso uno diría, bueno, ¿y cómo vamos a hacer
And
esto? Sí, pues era
some
lo que nos
people may
faltaba, pues
argue, on top of
autoestima, pues
everything
esto.
we need to
Bueno,
do,
pues
we need
mire,
to do all
pues
that.
la
No, well,
investigación no
research
para de
continues to
trabajar y de
evolve,
desarrollar
developing useful tools
herramientas que
not
os
only
sean de
for
utilidad,
teachers
les
but
sean de
also
utilidad a los
parents.
profesores, a los padres,
We have
etcétera, ¿no?
already
Hemos puesto ya hace bastantes años
shared
los cuestionarios
Rogers
de Rogers que se desarrollaron en 2002
scales
y los de
and
Castellano en
different forms
2005.
and
Luego se
surveys that we
llevaron
have
a
shared. They
la
are,
red de manera que se
applicable
pueden
online as
aplicar
well. You
online,
can
los tienen
find them on my
los pueden buscar en mi
blog.
blog o ponen
You will
cuestionarios de
obviously
Rogers
find the
online y lo van a
Rogers
encontrar inmediatamente.
forms. But
Estamos
you
ahora
also have
mismo,
Renzulli's
bueno, están las
scales.
escalas de
But you
Renzulli, por
also
supuesto,
have
pero
the
no me
recent
puedo alargar.
Pfeiffer and
Y ahora estamos
Jurasovich
trabajando,
GRS, the gifted
estamos viendo
rating
varios estudios muy
scales.
interesantes con Marta Touron en las
The
Gifted
second
Rating
edition,
Scales, la segunda edición, tiene cambios
which
sobre
is
la
a
primera,
scale
que
for
es una escala para padres, una
parents,
escala
for
para
primary,
profesores de
secondary
primaria, secundaria y bachillerato y
education
otra escala
teachers,
para
and another
profesores
one for
de
nursery
educación
teachers. And
infantil.
these are all
Todos estos son
instruments with the
instrumentos
intention
que lo
of
que quieren es
helping teachers
ayudar a los
in the
profesores a que
screening and
identifiquen
identification of the
las
strengths
fortalezas,
and
los
weaknesses of
puntos
their
fuertes, los
students,
puntos
to
débiles de los
help them
alumnos, que les
get to
ayuden a
know them
conocerlos
better,
mejor,
so
para
we
que
can
yo
little
creo
by
que
little
vayamos poco a
pave the
poco
ground,
haciendo un
create a
movimiento, pero que hay que
movement
hacerlo más que poco a
that
poco,
is
diría
badly
mucho a
needed.
mucho, porque aunque
And
nosotros tengamos tiempo,
even if
que
we
tampoco
just
tanto, ya se
have
ve que yo
enough
me voy
time to do
quedando
this,
ganas,
we do,
pero
but
los
not the
niños tienen menos
children,
tiempo
not the
todavía, ¿no?
children. We need to
Pero
look
tenemos
for
que ir a una escuela más centrada en la capacidad
a
y menos
capacity
centrada
or
en
a
la edad,
skill
donde los
centered
niños se puedan
school, and
mover
to
por el currículo en
adapt their
función y
curriculum.
puedan
And that's why
recibir.
we have
Y
talked
ahí está el
about
enriquecimiento. Por eso hemos hablado
type
del
1, 2, and
enriquecimiento
3
tipo uno,
enrichment.
2 y
Type 1
3.
is for
El
everyone.
enriquecimiento
Type
de
2
tipo
is
uno
for
es
those
para
that
todos. El de
do
tipo
have an
2
interest
es
in
para los que
A,
tienen
B,
interés en A o
or
en B.
type
Y
3
ya
is
el
for the
enriquecimiento de tipo
most
3 es para las personas
gifted.
más capaces que
And
realmente hacen
to research
proyectos de
about real
investigación sobre problemas
problems that
reales
may
que
have
resulten apasionantes,
a
reales.
solution for
Por tanto,
um,
yo
real issues. So I would like to
terminaría
conclude
aquí
by
diciendo
saying
que
that
lo que tenemos que lograr
we need to
es
ensure
que
that absolutely every student
todos los alumnos
coming
de
from any
todos
given
los
school
centros
shall be
sean
assessed
evaluados periódicamente. ¿En
periodically
qué o cómo que
in
sean
those
evaluados? En
variables
aquellas variables
which
que
are
son
relevant for
relevantes para el
learning
aprendizaje.
purposes.
En el
In
caso que a
our
nosotros nos
case,
ocupa, porque la escuela está
Schools are
orientada al
oriented
alumno
to
medio
the
y por tanto el
mid
que
size of
destaca
the
por arriba
table, and
es
those
el
that
más perjudicado,
are on the
también el
top
que destaca por
end of
abajo,
the range are those
pero
that
claro, el que
are
destaca por abajo inmediatamente
least represented.
es sujeto de
But
educación
those
especial y de
are
ayudas
on
y
the
apoyos.
lower
Sin
end
embargo,
of
no
the
se tiene la
scale.
misma
They are,
consideración como el que
receiving
destaca o
subsidies innate
necesitaría
to
destacar por
education and
arriba.
special education.
Como
But as
decía
I said, I
Elliot
would like to
Eisner, y con
finish with a
esta cita
quote.
sí que termino, eh, mm, la escuela
School
no
is
está
not
para
made
promover
in
la
order to
igualdad.
foster
La
equality.
escuela
School is
está para
there in
promover
order
las
to promote
diferencias. Y
differences.
la
A
buena
good school
escuela
is one that
es la que
promotes
promueve y
and
atiende a las
takes care of
diferencias.
differences among
De
their
tal manera
students. It
que
needs to increase
ha
the
de
average,
elevar la
but also
media de
expand
todos,
the
pero
variance
aumentar la
and the
varianza. Es
variability
decir,
of their students. And if
imaginémonos
you follow
que
the principle
siguiendo el
of
principio de
equal
igualdad de
opportunities,
oportunidades, todos
all
los
students
alumnos salgan
uh,
al mismo tiempo de la
shall
meta,
start the race at the
de
same
la
time.
primera
And from
salida,
that moment
y
onwards,
a partir de ahí
anyone
que
can
cada uno
race as
corra
fast as they
tan
can,
lejos,
as fast as they
tan
want, and as
rápido
deeply as they
y con
want,
tanta
as their
profundidad
capacity
como
and
su
circumstances allow
capacidad
them
y
to do so. If
circunstancias
we
le
do it
permitan.
in
Si
such a
lo
way,
hacemos
we
así,
will then contribute
estaremos contribuyendo
significantly
de una manera
to
significativa
human
al
development and
desarrollo de
the
las
social
personas y
construction,
a la
which is badly
construcción
needed, because
social.
whether we like it
Porque
or
nos
not,
guste más o nos guste
our
menos,
future will
nuestro
always depend
futuro
upon the
depende
most
siempre
capable
de las
people,
personas más
because they
capaces,
are the
porque son
ones
ellos
which are going to
los que
promote
van a promover
improvements
los
in
avances
science,
en la
development in
ciencia,
arts, in
en las artes,
sports, in
en los
absolutely any
deportes,
field
en
in
cualquier
life.
ámbito de
So
la vida que queramos
to
considerar. Por tanto,
promote
atender
social
al talento y
development
promover el
and the
desarrollo
gifted
social
are
son
two
dos
things which
cosas
are badly needed,
que a mí
and
me parece
we can
que
argue they are
podríamos decir son
synonymous.
sinónimas. Bueno, pues no
With
les aburro
that,
más
I leave you
y
without
muchas gracias por
thank you
su
without
atención.
no, thank you first for your attention.
Bueno, muchas gracias por tu presentación
Thank you very much indeed, and thank you,
y
Mr. Turan.
gracias
Thank
a
you very
todos por
much for your
vuestra
presentation.
participación.
And I would like to
Sabemos que ha
thank you all
habido
for your
muchísimo
kind
interés y
participation.
confiamos en
We
que
know
os
that
haya
there has been
resultado útil.
growing interest, and we hope
Como
truly
el
that you
tiempo es
found
limitado,
these
pero estoy
useful.
seguro de que las intervenciones de los ponentes
Because
han
we have
suscitado
limited time, but I
muchas
am
preguntas
certain
e
that
interés por
you
saber
have
más.
been most interested
Para
about the
terminar,
presentations
os
of
quería
the
dejar en el
three
chat
speakers.
algunos
To
enlaces,
conclude, I would
algunos
like to
materiales y
give you
recursos
some links on the
que os
chat
pueden
box,
servir
some
para
materials,
profundizar
some
en algunos de
resources
los
that you
temas que
may
hemos
find
tratado hoy
interesting in
aquí,
order to deepen on the
como el
topics we have
libro del modelo
discussed here
SEM
today,
o el
such as
proyecto piloto que
the
hicimos
SEM
hace
model book
unos
or the
meses
pilot project that
sobre
we
Rensuri
developed
Learning.
a few months ago
Bueno, esperamos
on
que algunas de
Renzulli
estas
learning
ideas y
and in
recursos
cooperation with
os sirvan
Mr.
para ello.
Renzulli. And we
Muchas
truly hope these
gracias,
ideas
un
and
saludo y
resources
hasta la próxima.
would be useful. Thank you very much indeed. See you later.